This is a part of my channel where we're just going to completely give in to my basic needs as an individual who has made a book their entire personality. That book is Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber.
YA fantasy romance. It is immaculate. It is heartbreaking. It will make you fall in love, and then it will rip your heart out and put it on the floor and then stomp on it repeatedly until it's just a pile of mush.
Now, book 3 is coming out October 24th, so I decided to finally do this plot summary. We have book 1 we're going to be doing today, and then I want to do book 2 before the release of book 3, so everyone's caught up. If you haven't read the book yet, you can watch this. If you have read the book but you want to get caught up and refreshed without reading the book, you can watch this. And if you just love this series as much as I do, and you don't care how many times you read or reread it, you still want to watch this, this is for you. So we're just going to go ahead and get into it because this is going to be a long one. So go ahead and grab your beverage of choice. I got my coffee, we're ready to go. So go ahead, buckle up, get comfortable. This is going to be a long one. Now this book is broken up into parts. So we're going to start with part 1, obviously, which is the tale of Evangeline Fox. And if you see me looking over here, it's because I'm looking at my script. As much as I will try to just play off memory here, we do need to use the script, so I apologize. And I do want to give honorable mention to our little cast, our little fan cast here. So we have the beautiful, the bright Evangeline Fox front and center. Then we have the rest of our cast, which I will introduce as they come up. But we're going to start with Evangeline. She's the first person in our book. So, yeah. Our story starts with Evangeline Fox holding a crumpled piece of newspaper, and she's on the doorsteps of like this decrepit church-looking thing. After 2 weeks of searching for it, she finally found it. It is the Church of the Prince of Hearts. And the Prince of the Church of Hearts is what they call a fate in this world, so they have a bunch of fates. Even though it was really dangerous to deal with the fates, she knew that there were rules when dealing with them, so she was kind of prepared for whatever she was about to encounter when she got to this church. The 3 rules were: always promise less than you give, for the fates always take more. Do not make bargains with more than one fate. And above all, never fall in love with fate. Now, quick recap of the fates that we've just learned about like 5 seconds ago. There's 16 immortal fates. Essentially ruled the world centuries ago, but they all disappeared. People still pray and talk to them, but for the most part, people kind of just have forgotten about them, as we can tell by this decrepit church that she's walking into. Now, as Evangeline walks through this church, she immediately notices the scent of apples and blood. And then she remembers that with the Church of the Prince of Hearts, it's supposed to smell like your greatest heartbreak. Now this, if you guys are going to pay attention here, is what we like to call foreshadowing. All of a sudden she hears like a rip in the air, and she turns around and she sees a man at the altar, and he's like crouched over. It looks like he's in mourning, but kind of hard to tell. And so when she walks up to the altar as well, she notices the statue of the Prince of Hearts, and she immediately notices his physical appearance. According to myth, the Prince of Hearts is described as tragically handsome with vivid blue eyes and crying tears of blood. According to myth, he was not capable of love because his heart had stopped beating. Only his one true love was capable of making his heart beat again. And another thing about the Prince of Hearts is his kiss is deadly to all but his one true love. So there's that. So at the statue, he's holding a dagger, and in order to pray to him, you have to like give him a drop of your blood. So she puts her fingertip to the tip of the dagger, boop, makes some blood drop on the floor, and she does her thing. She starts praying. And this is where we learn why she's here. The love of her life, Luke, announced that he was engaged to her sister, Marisol. That's gonna be this girl right down here, okay? And I think this is a pretty accurate choice for picture that I chose. We'll find out more about her later, but I digress. Now, she believes that Luke, which is played by Dean Thomas here, or not Dean Thomas, which is played by Dean from Gilmore Girls, if you know, you know. And she believes Luke has been cursed, so she wants to break this curse by praying to the Prince of Hearts in order to call off this wedding, because she believes that Luke is the love of her life, and she needs to save him. And as she's praying this prayer, she hears a voice from behind her saying, "That was a pathetic speech." The same boy that was once hunched over in prayer is now sitting lazily on the dais, and he's eating an apple, kind of being disrespectful, and she's yelling at him, like, "Stop doing that, you're being disrespectful." And he is like, "You're the one that's praying to this statue asking for help. Like, you're the one that looks more ridiculous than I do." And as she's staring at him, realization kind of dawns on her, and she realizes all at once by kind of doing this double take thing that he looks really similar to the statue that she was just praying at. And that's when she realizes, it's you, you're the Prince of Hearts. And welcome to the stage, Jax. And Jax immediately is kind of just ignoring the fact that she realizes he is the Prince of Hearts, and he's asking her these random questions like, what color is your hair? Where are you from? And most notably, how many times have you been kissed? And this is where our banter begins in the story. You're just prepare yourself for a lot of banter in this story. It's amazing. And she's automatically on the defensive that Luke obviously is the only person she's ever kissed. Jax replies, I'm almost tempted to believe you, and then proceeds to explain that everyone lies, and even if she were telling the truth, it's pretty obvious that Luke doesn't love her. But Evangeline begs, and he eventually agrees to help. He tells her, I will stop the wedding in exchange for 3 kisses. Now remember what I said before, that Jax is the Prince of Hearts and he is cursed, so he cannot kiss anybody without killing them unless it's his one true love. So obviously Evangeline knows this, and she's like, absolutely not. I'm not going to be kissing you. Which he explains, you're not going to be kissing me. You're going to be kissing 3 people of my choice when I choose it. And reluctantly she agrees, because what choice does she have? And so he seals the deal with a kiss on her wrist, and she gets like 3 little marks on her wrist. And yeah, so he seals the deal with 3 kisses on her wrist, and it says, it was barely a touch, and yet there was something incredibly intimate about it. It made her think of the stories that said his kisses might have been fatal, but they were worth dying for. Now at this point, a lot of different things happen all at once. Jax disappears, and Evangeline feels immediately like she's just made a huge mistake. So she runs, she bolts out of this church, and she makes for the ceremony place where the ceremony was supposed to take place for Luke and Marisol. And when she gets there, she finds the entire wedding party has been turned to stone. Like he said, he stopped the wedding from happening by turning them all to stone. So Jax is there, and she's freaking out, and he's just like, and he tells her, if you want to stop this, the only way to make them come back alive again is to take their place. Someone has to take their place. So she immediately does it and is like, I'm going to drink this goblet of whatever this potion is. I'm going to do it, and Luke will save me because he loves me. And he warns her, don't do this. Like, you don't want to be the hero. You want the happy ending. If you do this, that will never happen. Heroes don't get happy endings. They give them to other people. One of the most famous lines of this book, and I gotta tell you, it's pretty good. As you can expect to happen when you drink a poison, she turns to stone. Everything goes black, and then we get to the next chapter, and then this is when we're introduced to Poison. I don't have him up here, but I'm gonna put a little picture of who I think he looks like, because I ran out of ink. Now, Poison is another fate, and Evangeline wakes up with poison in some room, and he informs her that she's been out for like 6 weeks. Jax has left Valenda, which is the kingdom where she's from. And she is now known everywhere as the hero, the girl that saved the day, saved this wedding, revived all these people from being turned to stone, which would have been a travesty. And then we find out that all of the fates that had been stuck for centuries have been released somehow, and it was called the Week of Terror. So while Evangeline was in the suspended state of stonage for 6 weeks, this happened. So all the fates have been released, and there's just been like havoc. And then we learn that Luke, after he was turned back to a normal man, tries to marry Marisol again, okay? So he, who was supposedly in love with her, leaves her to marry the sister, and then when she tries to save him from being turned into stone, he thanks her by going back with her again. But it never comes to pass, and he ends up being mauled by a wolf. Now, at this point, Evangeline is kind of at a crossroads, if you will. So her stepmother, the woman that married her father, obviously the mom to Marisol, she sold her father's curiosity shop, which she grew up working at with her dad. So her stepmother sells this store. She lost the love of her life. And then we have, because she's now famous as like this hero, all of the men in this town are like asking for Evangeline's hand in marriage.
It's a whole thing.
Now, one day, Marisol gets an invitation from an empress, and it is written to Evangeline. So she goes to Evangeline, is like,
hey girl, we got invited to tea with the empress.
Because Evangeline was like so famous in town, that's why she got the invitation to tea. So they go, and that is when we meet Scarlet and Donatella, and these two characters are actually in the Carval series, so if you want to read those, you totally can. It's not necessary to read in order to understand what's happening in the context of this book, but you could read this series and then read that one, and you'll notice some spoilery content in this book, but again, not necessary. Now, Scarlet is the Empress, her sister is Donatella. They ask a favor of Evangeline to attend this event called Nocta Neverending. It is a ball in order to honor Prince Apollo in the search for his new bride, and it's basically not supposed to end until he finds her. They can't go for personal reasons. Donatella has some beef with someone that she knows is going to be there, so they invite Evangeline and her sister to go in their stead. Obviously, that sounds absolutely amazing, right? It's giving Cinderella ball vibes. She gets to go get all the dresses. She gets to stay in this beautiful palace and hopefully meet a prince and fall in love and maybe get a second chance at love that she didn't get with Luke. And as they're trying to explain the prince, they realize that they can't really remember what he looks like or anything, but at the mention of Prince Apollo's name, Evangeline notices that her wrist is starting to burn. And this is when we get to part 2, which is the Magnificent North. The girls travel by ship to the north and pass through a great arch through the Valor Graveyard, home to the first great family in the north. Now, if you're a fan of the Bridgerton series and Lady Whistledown, you'll probably appreciate this. In the book, we have what is called the Daily Rumor. It's kind of like a gossip column, and it spreads out everywhere. So they receive a copy, and they notice that Evangeline is kind of the hot topic of conversation in town. People are placing bets, and they kind of think that Evangeline will be chosen as Apollo's bride. So now, something we need to know about our girl E over here is not only is she really pretty, but she also believes in fairy tales. I mean, what young girl wouldn't? She's even a bigger believer in love, as we can't tell by the fact that she tried to save her boyfriend who was marrying her sister. From stories she heard as a child from her father, she believes with all her heart that she can find true love in the Magnificent North, and insert irony into this plotline. Now, we have the first night of Nocta Neverending. It's kind of like a cocktail party where people are just meeting each other, and everyone is really staring at her. She has rose gold hair, as we can see by the picture, and so people are just kind of whispering. No one really wants to talk to her, but she does see another girl across the room, also by herself, so she goes and tries to introduce herself to her, try to make a friend. And this girl is stunning. Like, she's the most beautiful girl there, okay? So maybe it's because she's so beautiful, no one wants to talk to her. It could be one of those things. And at this point, we don't get the girl's name yet, but here is what we do get. We have Prince Apollo, up above on this balcony, like looking down at the courtyard below, and he's posing for a portrait, which kind of cringy, honestly. But he's beautiful, as princes probably are. And then she also notices Jax, who has just entered the chat again. And he's 100% stealing the show. Like, even though Apollo, like, this party is for Apollo, she can't help but, like, just notice Jax. And how does she know that Jax is there? Is because she accidentally runs into him, because of course she does. And we do get a little more detail of his appearance, which to me is a little swoon-worthy in my opinion. So she's seen Jax from far away, but this close he was different. He was 1,000 cuts happening all at once. Devastation made of hair as blue as dark ocean waves, and lips sharp as cracked glass that would delightedly cut her. How could no one here know that he was a fate? Evangeline could feel his inhuman gaze gliding over her skin, making her blood rush as his eyes raked over her silver line, wrapping tightly around her hips, her waist, her chest. He stopped, gaze drifting off before meeting her eyes as if she wasn't worth the effort to continue. So here we have Jax, and they're up close and personal. He's kind of taken her in, and it seems like he's really just disinterested in her, couldn't give a crap about her, and she is just really annoyed with him. Why is he here? He is the reason that everyone she loved kind of turned into stone, and then she turned into stone and she could have died. She accuses him immediately of having Luke mauled by a wolf, to which he responds, that would be incredibly messy. Why the heck would I do that? Also, this is the part of the story where Jax tells Evangeline that Apollo is the first person he wants her to kiss. While all of this is going on, there's still a cocktail party. Like, you can just imagine people are whispering like, oh my gosh, this really hot guy is just leaning over Evangeline, this random girl with rose gold hair, and it looks like they're, something very intimate is happening. He's whispering in her ear. Could they be kissing? Oh, and just a little sidebar, that if she doesn't kiss Apollo by the end of the night, Evangeline will die. As you can imagine, Evangeline, who now has to kiss Prince Apollo, who is up here by the way, by order of Jax, so she's completely convinced that Jax is just pure evil. Now, also at this point in the story, so we haven't officially met Apollo. We just have seen him from like above in this balcony, but we're gonna get a lot of moments in this story starting now from the author. It really just makes you want to
internally scream into a pillow.
Because on page 112, we finally get to meet Apollo. So basically in this party, the girls are going one by one to introduce themselves to the prince, and it's finally Evangeline's turn, and it looks like Jax and Apollo are friends somehow. We don't really know why, but Jax takes Evangeline by the arm and takes her upstairs to meet the prince. So they get up to Apollo's rooms, and his back is to her, and she's freaking out. Evangeline's like, I don't know what to do. How am I supposed to kiss a prince? Like, oh my gosh. And she's only ever kissed Luke. And then we get our description of Apollo. It says he was tall, but not as impossibly attractive as Jax. Apollo's face was more interesting than classically handsome. He possessed a slightly crooked, aquiline nose, which might have overwhelmed another person's face, but all his features were a bit intense, from his thick, dark eyebrows to his deep-set eyes. His skin was olive. His hair was heavy and dark and cropped closer to better show off his strong features. He'd forsaken the antler crown, but he was still obviously a prince. Utterly commanding as he leaned one elbow against his balcony rail and gave her a smile that said, I might not be the most handsome person in the room, but you know that you're intrigued. Now at this point, you can kind of imagine Evangeline, like she's just taking in this prince, right? She's never met someone like this before. She's just a little nobody girl, and she can't help but stare. And so then we get this quote from Jax, which is like, you're drooling a little bit over here. She's utterly mortified at this comment because he said it very loud enough for Prince Apollo to hear, and he bursts out loud. Now, Evangeline is obviously mortified, and she is just trying to tell Jax to leave. Apollo is starting to notice some weird chemistry thing going on between Jax and Evangeline, and he's kind of getting disinterested, like, I don't like that you keep talking about Jax in front of me. So he's, the clock is ticking, right? She still has to kiss Apollo. So she does the only thing she thinks she can do, and she cups his cheek. She says, I'm sorry, obviously, for like talking about Jax in front of him so much, and she kisses him. And at first, nothing really happens. It's just a kiss, but then it kind of progresses, and I'm not going to really get into that too much because I don't really feel the need to explain to you how a hot passionate kiss goes, but you kind of get the picture. But it gets that hot and heavy that Jax eventually pulls Evangeline away, and at the last page of this chapter it says, Apollo remained rooted in place. Thankfully, he was still very much alive, but he didn't look quite right. He stood in the middle of the suite, intently tracing his lips with his finger. Tracing and tracing, as if the act could reveal to him what had just happened, why his control had slipped with a girl he'd thought to turn away. Evangeline had wanted the same thing, and Apollo catches her eyes. There were still embers of heat in his gaze, but she couldn't tell if it looked like passion or anger. And so she whispers to Jax, Jax, what did you do? And he responds, it's not what I did, little fox. It's what you've done. And tomorrow night, you get to do even more. So to summarize, Evangeline, who is told to kiss Apollo by Prince Jax, she's obviously freaking out because she's like, is he going to be killing Apollo? What is going to happen when I kiss Apollo? What's the deal with that? And turns out Apollo doesn't die, but something else bad she feels is about to happen. So we don't know what that is yet. And that's basically how the chapter ends. So now it's the next morning. And now we're going to talk a little bit more about our girl, Marisol, who I'll give you a little close-up picture here of what she looks like. I really think this is the most accurate depiction of Marisol, in my opinion. Maybe she has different colored hair, but, I really think this is a lifelike portrait of her. Moving on. So we haven't really talked too much about the relationship specifically with Evangeline and Marisol. So we're going to learn a little more in this chapter. We see them strolling through the shops. Marisol is insistent on going alone. She doesn't really want to hang out with Evangeline, even though they're shopping for the night's ball and things like that, and exploring the magnificent north because, like I said before, everything in the air is just more magical and alive, and it's exciting. And Evangeline is just such a nice girl. She really just wants to hang out with her stepsister. She hasn't really had a chance to very much because their stepmother, for the purposes of this video, will kind of just like draw her in. her. So she is really mean to Evangeline and also to Marisol, and she never really let them hang out or anything. She's really mean to Marisol, very demeaning, not a great, kind of emotionally abusive mother. Anyway, Marisol is intent on going alone and meeting up later when they get ready for dinner, which Evangeline thinks is weird. So we're just gonna note that as weird number one. Later, they get an article, like later in the day, they get an article from the Daily Rumor talking about Marisol being the cursed bride because she had 2 marriage attempts that completely failed. Again, we have the marriage attempt where she gets turned into stone, and then the second time where something happens, it doesn't go through, and then Luke gets mauled by a wolf. So now people are calling her the cursed bride. So she's just absolutely a disaster mess, hot mess over here. And when Evangeline tries to console Marisol accidentally rips a piece of Evangeline's dress. Like, she's wearing this beautiful ruffled gown, and we find that is kind of weird, number 2, because the way the dress is described in this book, it's a little difficult to have ripped off one of the flower petals from this dress. Like, you would have had to intentionally rip it off. There wasn't anything on Marisol that could have gotten caught in order for it to have ripped on its own.
It's giving sus vibes, honestly.
But again, we don't really know too much more than that, so at this point it's just hearsay. Now, one thing I really love about this book is that it's how it sets up each new scene. While this book isn't really long-winded, we don't get too much extensive world building. The imagery that we do get is so beautiful, and it does give us just enough detail we need to completely set up the scene. And also the magnificent north in general, which is where they're at. Just as an example, the happiness in the air felt touchable, the magic in the air was tasteable, and the sky seemed a little closer to earth. If Evangeline had a dagger, she imagined she could have sliced into the night as if it were a cake and stolen a piece of it to take a bite of all the wondrous dark. I absolutely love the imagery here. If you are a fan of Alice in Wonderland or anything like that, I do think you would really appreciate the writing style of this book and just Stephanie Garber as a whole. The Caraval series does it a little bit, but I think she really perfected it in this book series. Now, back to Evangeline. It's now nighttime, and it's now night 1, the official night 1 of Nocta Never Ending, so she's going to the party now. Having a good time. She's learning about a game called Kissing Chess, which, to be honest, kind of sounds really fun. And then she sees Jax, and it says, he looked like a bad decision some unfortunate person was about to make.
The descriptions of Jax in this book, I will be haunted for the rest of my life with these quotes about him.
Also, just would like to honorably mention the fact that he is once again holding an apple, and she notices that that Jax is talking to Marisol, which cannot be a really good thing, because why on earth would this guy be talking to her? Why? Why is this happening? So she's getting really, really bad vibes here, and Evangeline's just not, she's feeling really weird about the situation. Now, Apollo, up here, he is dressed up as the archer from this fairy tale that she grew up listening to as a little girl, called The Ballad of the Archer and the Fox. And Evangeline, thinking because her last name is Fox, she thinks he got dressed up for her. And at this point of the party, Evangeline meets up with Lala, who she finds out was a girl from night 1, and Lala, who I really do think looks like the girl from Legally Blonde, Reese Witherspoon over here. So they're talking, and Lala is all like, girl, Apollo wants you. He dressed up for you. It's obvious. Your last name is Fox. He's the archer. This is so romantic. He's gonna do something so romantic tonight. Like, just you wait. And so Evangeline just can't help but agree with her, like, oh my gosh, you're totally right. Like, why else would he dress up as the archer if I'm a fox? Like, I'm Evangeline Fox. Except, so she's like all excited and she's getting ready to approach him, except Apollo isn't trying to approach her. He approaches another girl. So now Evangeline is just mortified because everyone saw her get up and try and walk towards Apollo, but Apollo kind of like steers this way instead and goes to another girl and asks her to dance. Evangeline, she's just super mortified. She's embarrassed yet again, and so she goes off mumbling to herself in this corner to get some punch. And as she's like talking to herself, her little internal monologue, she hears a voice in her head, and it says,
self-pity doesn't look good on you, little fox.
And she just stops dead in her tracks, like, what? She doesn't know what's happening, but she's so stunned she doesn't realize that Apollo then walks up behind her. Buckle your seatbelts, okay? Because Evangeline confronts Apollo about not asking Evangeline to dance. He said, well, I didn't want to ask you to dance because I wouldn't have been able to get through the entire dance without doing this.
And what does he do?
What does he do on the first official night of Not to Never Ending? He gets on one freaking knee and he asks Evangeline if she will marry him. And what does she say? Yes. As you haven't realized already, this book goes real quick, okay? We're not even halfway through this book, and she is now engaged to the prince. She's about to be a princess. And something to note before this chapter ends is that when he proposes, he says, I want you, Evangeline Fox. I want to write ballads for you on the walls of Wolf Hall and carve your name on my heart with swords. I want you to be my wife and my princess and my queen. Marry me, Evangeline, and let me give you everything. Notices that no one had ever looked at Evangeline like this before, not even Luke. In fact, she couldn't even picture Luke anymore. All she could see was the longing and the hope and the hint of fear swirling in Apollo's expression, as if she might say no. But how could she? And so obviously this is why she says yes, but we think it's a little odd at first. Like he's only known her for 24 hours. Why is he all of a sudden proposing to Evangeline and he's pouring his heart out in front of all of these people as if he'd known her entire life? So something's a little iffy about that. But of course she's gonna say yes. How could she not? She's looking for her one true love, happily ever after, and she thinks she can find that with Prince Apollo. So now we get to chapter 19. And the scene changes. It's the next day. Marisol and Evangeline are back in their rooms and they're talking, and Marisol is congratulating her and hugging her and telling her how happy she is and all of this stuff. And obviously for, natural reasons, I don't think we're going to be really taking those words too seriously. It's a grain of salt over here. So anyway, while she's congratulating Evangeline, Marisol is mentioning how handsome she thinks Jax is. And Evangeline is quick to be like, no, let's not hang out with Jax. He's not a good guy. And they kind of get into a little spiffy thing. Like she's like, oh, you already have a prince. Why do you care about Jax? Blah, blah, blah. And right when this little tiff is going on, Prince Apollo barges into the room and is like, you have to read this. And he brings her a piece of paper, which is the Daily Rumor. It's basically talking about Marisol and that at the engagement party she looked absolutely murderous, and so now Apollo is fearful for Evangeline's life, and he's basically like, please move into Wolf Hall with me, you'll have your own room, but I just want to keep you near me for safety reasons. And Marisol's invited to come too, but she's gonna have her own room. So that's pretty much how that chapter goes. The next several chapters go a little something like this. Evangeline is receiving a ton of presents and gifts and is just like bathed in jewels and horses and dresses by Prince Apollo. A lot of things are happening all at once because they want to get married in like a week. And she's also getting tons of notes from Apollo, and they're all written like cute little notes, and they say, from your truest love, Apollo. Which, I mean, gifts, amazing. My husband take notes on this, but also it's kind of weird. And Evangeline notices this too. She may be looking for true love, but she's not a dummy. She's not an idiot. She knows something is weird. And she knows that Jax had something to do with whatever is happening to Apollo. So she goes to scope him out. And they meet up in his carriage, and Jax, again, he's eating an apple, and he's like just sitting there all ruggedly handsome, as all villains in stories are. He tells her basically just to suck it up. She's gonna get a wedding. She's gonna get her true love. Just be happy. And if she calls off the wedding, that she's gonna break Apollo's heart and he'll be living in like unrequited love forever, and that's just like a terrible way to go. So why would she do that to Apollo? Like, now also at this point in time, she notices that the carriage is moving, and so she's like, what are we doing? Let me out. And he's like, no, I need you for another kiss. So they're going to the lady, the matriarch of House Fortuna. Okay, so we haven't met her yet, but that's where they're going. And because it's been a couple of pages since the author has made us swoon, they seal the deal again with one of those little blood thing on the lips, and they're in close quarters already, so they're getting really close, and Jax is just basically on top of her, going like this with her lips, and it's just like a whole thing. So at this moment, also, Jax tells Evangeline that if she goes through with the wedding, after the wedding, he will call off the wedding. But he's like, just accept the gift. What I want isn't going to hurt anyone. And she can't help but eye him and his dagger and said, I don't think you and I have the same definition of hurt. And the chapter ends with Jax giving her a smile that was all sharp edges. A drop of blood fell from the corner of his mouth and something godforsaken washed over him as he says, hurt is what made me. So again, we're in our villain era here. He says these things as if to like scare her, but obviously
We're just swooning, over here as one does when villains say things like this.
And so they're on their way to this house, and she is told that she can get through the wedding with Apollo, but eventually the spell will be broken, blah, blah, blah. All we know so far is that she's a horrible woman, and Jax is like, we just need to get in, get out, kiss her on the cheek, that's all you gotta do, but we don't have a lot of time. And Evangeline at this point is just completely fed up with Jax, understandably so. And she comments on why so many people avoid him, to which he responds, I don't ignore everyone. The other night, I had a lovely conversation with your stepsister. So they get into a little fight, obviously, and Evangeline is defending Marisol, but Jax is over here saying, no, you need to watch out for Marisol. And Evangeline is saying, no, Marisol needs to watch out for you. So she's thinking it's kind of weird that like Jax doesn't care for Evangeline, but why is he warning her about Marisol when Evangeline also has her own suspicions about Marisol, but she hasn't really said anything out loud really. So far, it's just weird coincidences that have been happening, but Jax obviously is noticing them, and he's like, watch out for your sister. And he goes so far as to tell her, this girl is not your friend. She might tell herself she wants to be, but she wants what you have even more. So now at this point in the book, we're about halfway through. Still pretty confused about Jax, his ulterior motives, his apples. When they get to the house of Lady Fortuna, they realize really quickly that she's a pill, and she's threatening to kill them immediately if they don't leave the house. So Evangeline, she just does what she did last time with Apollo, and she just runs up to this girl and kisses her flat on the cheek. And immediately this old lady, turns from like a devil woman into like the granny that bakes you cookies at Christmas time. Super sweet. Jax wastes no time at this point to ask Lady Fortuna for a tour of the house. More specifically, her vaults, because she apparently has like a large vault that they need to see. So they go downstairs and they're like touring everything. And something I have yet to bring up in this book is the appearances of arches. So when they first got into the Magnificent North, they passed through an arch and it like said the Magnificent North, blah, blah, blah. And also the graveyard-ish place of the Great Valor family, which again, as I mentioned, is the first great family of the Magnificent North. As Evangeline and Jax are like walking through this vault, they find an arch that once belonged to the Valors, and we learn a little bit more about them in this scene. We find out that the Valors were this great family and they had special abilities, so they passed those abilities on to their children, and so they were just very, very powerful family. Legend has it that the Valor family created these arches to allow them to transport themselves from like different places. So these arches apparently are magical. However, once the Valor family like disappeared or died or whatever, the arches were kind of lost with them. So we still see archers in this book. However, the arch in this house was supposed to have been lost, and Jax realizes it. Jax is still kind of like rummaging through all of the stuff in this house. There's like jewels and vases and all this stuff, but he's just disinterested. So Evangeline's like, what the heck are we here for? What are we looking for? Just tell me and I can help you look. And so then Jax is just mentioned something. He mumbles something about stones. So Evangeline tells this granny lady like, hey, I just want to know something about stones. Do you know anything about that? And it snaps. Something snaps in this old lady. She bounces back to whatever it was that's put her in a spell. And she's like, she realizes exactly, she like looks at Evangeline. She notices the rose gold hair, and she's like, oh my gosh.
You will know her because she will be crowned in rose gold. She will be both peasant and princess.
And she's repeating this over and over again. She's like yelling, and it's a whole thing. And Evangeline just grabs a vase and knocks her out. And they make her run for it. But not before she's like thinking through what this old lady just said. And she's realizing like, what did she just say? And what does it have to do with me? Because I have rose gold hair. And I'm engaged to the prince. I'm about to be a princess. So naturally, she's talking to Jax and she's like, what the heck is that about? And Jax, in his elusiveness, says, you don't need to worry about the Valerie Arch. You just need to marry Apollo. And obviously Evangeline is not happy about it. She's trying to like argue, but Jax once again brings up the fact that Apollo will be in unrequited love for the rest of his days and just in utter misery if Evangeline doesn't go through with this wedding, because he's like obsessed with Evangeline, like obsessed. And so he cups her cheek, and he basically tells her all of this stuff. And he says, it wasn't that long ago that I saw you in my church, willing to promise me almost anything to make the pain stop. Was that a lie, or have you already forgotten the way heartbreak rips apart the soul piece by piece, how it turns you into a masochist, making you long for the thing that just eviscerated you until there is nothing left of you to be destroyed? His cold fingers dig into her cheek. And she says, are you still talking about my heartbreak or yours? And so he laughs and he says, you're getting better at the meanness, little fox, but you have to have a working heart for it to break. I do not. I can keep Apollo under his spell for eternity, so you can either marry him and save him from a life of misery, or you can try to prevent a dusty prophecy that you don't even understand. And that is the first time we hear about a prophecy. So now we hear about a prophecy, as all good fairy tales have one, and Evangeline obviously is determined to learn more about this prophecy and what does it have to do with her, how is she involved in this, why. But each passing day gets her closer and closer to marrying Apollo. Like I said, they kind of want to get married fast for some reason, or he does. And things are just getting weird. Like we see Apollo climbing up this balcony to try to reach her. He's obviously infatuated with Evangeline. He's obsessed with her, and she's just kind of weirded out by it. She's unsettled by it, but she knows that she kind of has to just do what Jax says at this point because she doesn't want to hurt Apollo. So when Apollo gets upstairs into her room and she's trying to like get more information, she realizes she can ask Apollo because he's grown up in the Magnificent North. He probably knows about all of these fairy tales and prophecies and legends and all of this stuff. And that's when she learns more about the Valerie Arch from Apollo. So she wants to learn specifically about the Valerie Arch, and so she asks him all these questions. And she says, some people say that if you open the arch, it holds treasures, but others say it holds like a monstrous beast. And so there's like a group of people called the Protectorate, and they have been created to kind of prevent people from trying to open this arch, but it's all part of the fairy tale. Again, he doesn't really know more than what he grew up learning as a kid himself, but it kind of gives her a little bit of an idea that there's something kept in this arch that should not be opened. And if Jax wants to open it, it's probably for bad intentions. So we fast forward again, because again, this book is just Speedy Gonzalez over here, and she gets married. Yep, she gets married. And as you can imagine, she's a little less than excited. After the ceremony, Apollo is still really bewitched. And Jax, like I said, is like, all right, if you kiss him again tonight, I'll break the spell and he'll be just his normal self. But just be sure you are aware of what you're doing, because once Apollo realizes that you put him under a spell, he's not going to love you anymore and things could get bad. We also meet Tiberius at this wedding reception, but I don't have him up here, so I'm going to put a little picture. This is Apollo's brother, and Tiberius makes his grand entrance. Nothing really happens in this time, but they have a dance, Evangeline and Tiberius, and he's a little skeptical of her just because things are moving really fast. But eventually, Evangeline is just determined to find Jax, break the spell, blah, blah, blah. And so Apollo finds Evangeline, and he's like, all right, let's go do this thing. Let's go for our wedding night. I'm tired of being around people. I just want to be with you. So she braces herself. She's like, all right, let's go do this. So Apollo leaves to go get ready or whatever. She finds Jax, and Jax promises, like, just kiss him. It'll all be over once you kiss him again. When she finds Apollo, where's my stick? So when she finds Apollo in their wedding chamber, he's like all lathered in oil. He's not like wearing a shirt or anything. And she's just like, oh my God, I just gotta get this over with. So she takes like a gulp of her wine and walks over to the bed, and she feels really bad, but they start kissing, and several things happen at once here. So we're just gonna, So the first thing that happens is the spell breaks. Number 2, Apollo looks a little angry and confused and hurt all at the same time. Number 3, he suddenly goes gray everywhere and he just dies. And the last sentence of the chapter reads,
she had killed him and Jax had tricked her into doing it.
So yeah, that's just one chapter. All of this happens. And I know what you're thinking. Stephanie Garber, girly, what are we doing here? Explain yourself. Because this poor puppy dog of a boy has done nothing wrong. And he just dies? And now she killed him? Unintentionally? So as you can imagine how one would react when they accidentally kill somebody and they're like a perfect little angel baby, like Evangeline. She just bursts into tears. She's a maniac. She's screaming, she's crying, and the guards are coming in and they're arresting her and they're like, oh my god, you're a murderer, you killed the prince. So Jax just casually saunters in and he just compels the guards to leave. He approaches her. He realizes that she's crying hysterically, something's wrong. And she's calling him a murderer, and he says, Apollo didn't die because of your kiss. There was no magic in that kiss. There was never any magic in your kisses. When Apollo fell in love with you, it was because I willed it. So now she's like besides herself, but she still can't stop crying. So he tries to compel her, like he did the guards, to stop crying, and it's not working. And he realizes that she's also been poisoned, and she will actually die from crying, which sounds terrible. And I would not want to go that way. Now, as a romantic hero that he is, Jax just hauls Evangeline over her shoulder and he goes to the one place where he knows the cure can be found. And where is that, you ask? At the home of our girl Lala. Lala. Now, what's the cure, you ask? Only she can make the cure or make the antidote. However, one of the side effects that are like crucial for her healing is that Evangeline has to have close physical contact for at least 24 hours, and Lala is busy making the antidote, so who's the only person in the room available to do such an act? Our homeboy Jax over here. So, of course, in order to like just make me die into a puddle, the chapter closes with this line, and it says, he held on to her as if she were a grudge, his body rigid and tense, as if he didn't really want her there. And yet his arms were tight around her waist as though he has no intentions of ever letting her go. Part 3. Chaos. So Evangeline wakes up. Obviously, she realizes that Lala saved her and she's actually a fate. So this is where we learn that Lala, our homegirl over here, she is actually the unwed bride. And what is the unwed bride? Basically doomed to fall in love and get to the wedding and all of this stuff, but on the wedding day, the wedding never goes through. So she's left perpetually heartbroken and her tears are poisonous. So unfortunately, she had bottled her tears up at one point years ago in order to sell them, and she had sold them years ago to somebody, poison, and someone bought those tears the other day. They don't know who it was, but it was a female. And so someone obviously put these poison tears into her wine in her wedding chamber. And however, everyone in the palace thinks that Evangeline and Jax were the cause of Apollo dying. So now people are looking for her, like, to arrest her. More specifically, Prince Tiberius, who is now the new prince, not just the brother. And obviously Jax and Evangeline, they want to clear their name, so who do they go to find out really what happened to Apollo? They're like, okay, well, I know one person that is like an ultimate spy. He is the lord of spy and assassins, and if anyone knows what happened to our boy Apollo, it'll be him. And who is that? That is Chaos. I don't have him up here again, so little picture. I do think he looks a little bit like Klaus. So anyway, they're gonna go to see Chaos, and Lala's freaking out. She's like, what, you can't be going to Chaos? He's crazy. La la la. And also, he's a vampire. So yeah, because
what's a fairy tale book? What's a fantasy romance book without a good vampire in your story? So here we go. We get vampires now.
So Lala helps them hide in their house while they're getting ready. They have to wait for nightfall to kind of leave. And we learn a little bit more about Lala. Honestly, she's one of my favorite characters in the story. She's so nice to Evangeline. She's so sweet. And Evangeline's wondering, like, why are you being so nice to me and helping me and stuff? And she honestly looks super upset, like a little baby, a little puppy. And she gets kind of teary-eyed and she's like, but I thought we were friends. And that's just a cute little thing. So Evangeline and Lala are now friends. And Lala's like, I'm gonna help you do whatever I can. And so they dress and they prepare to meet Chaos. And Evangeline, so Lala is a seamstress, also part of her job as like the unwed bride, to kind of help with the urges of trying to find true love that can never happen for her. She makes wedding dresses for people, so she's a seamstress. She makes this knee-length skirt for Evangeline and thigh-high boots and this like really tight corset that like kind of just goes up to here and shows off her décolleté, and a cape to go over it as well, shows off her neck and all of this stuff. Obviously, it sounds amazing, something I would wear. And she walks into the room, and Jax's reaction here, we're just gonna read it together. It says, Evangeline's stomach tumbled. She told herself it was because she was starting to feel hungry, not because of the way Jax slowly took in every inch of her black thigh-high boots, her shortened skirt, and the form-fitting lace corset pinching her waist, and he abruptly stopped when he reached all the skin that went from her neck to her chest. A muscle jumped in his jaw, the color deepened in his eyes, and for a fraction of a second, he looked murderous. Then suddenly, without warning, Jax tossed her his apple, and his expression cleared. You should bring a snack. It's going to be a long night. Now, as he tosses her the apple, she looks down and she realizes that there's a book also in his hands, and it says Recipes of the Ancient North, translated for the first time in 500 years. Now, back when Evangeline first got engaged and she was talking to Marisol in her rooms, Evangeline had noticed that on Marisol's nightstand was this book that was weird, and it said Recipes of the Ancient North as well. So she's realizing that Marisol and Jax have the same book. And Evangeline doesn't know how she managed to recall the title. She'd only seen the book once, and it had been over a week ago. She shouldn't have remembered it so well, but she should have remembered her stepsister before now. And she realizes, oh my god, I forgot about Marisol. And Lala's like, who's Marisol? And Jax is like, her stepsister, but I don't know why we're talking about her right now. It's like that volume was on Marisol's nightstand, and it made me realize how defenseless she is. She's at Wolf Hall, unless the royal soldiers have taken her somewhere else for questioning about me. And Jax is laughing it off and is like, believe me, you don't need to be worrying about your stepsister right now. And Lala thinks it's weird that Marisol had that book because it's not a cookbook. It's a spell book, and it's very dangerous and very old, and it's not easy to get. Like, if someone had a copy of this book, it's someone with nefarious intentions. You don't just have this book. And Evangeline is like, well, that can't be right because she's scared of magic, and there's no way she would get a book like this, and must have been on accident. And so Lala's explaining, like, no, this is a really nasty spell book. After the Valors were killed, most magic was banned in the North. So there's a lot of, like, forbidden spells and stuff in this book, and you need to watch out for your sister, essentially. So now things are starting to, like, take a turn in Evangeline's mind, and she's starting to really suspect Marisol over here of, like, just really bad intentions. Like, what the heck is going on? Why did she have this spell book? Maybe she's tried to poison me. Did she kill Apollo? She's got all these questions going up in her head. Now they're gonna go meet Chaos in his vampire lair. They get to the vampire lair, and Jax knocks on the door. They open it, and, like, there's a vampire just, like, looking Evangeline up and down, like, you know, whatever. And Jax, being who he is, he just wraps his hand around her waist, and he smiles at the little vampire and is like, stop flashing your fangs. I'm the only one who gets to bite her. Anyway, they eventually enter the room, or this hallway, and there's, like, cages up in the air, and it's super creepy, and there's, like, people in there, and Evangeline's just freaking out because it's scary, and Jax is even unsettled. Like, he does not want to be here. So we're just gonna do, like, a quick little story time, educational lesson, if you will, on how vampires are made in this book. Now, if you get bit by a vampire, two things can happen. Either you get blood taken out of you, or you get bit with vampire venom. If you get bit with the vampire venom, then you can turn into a vampire, but before dawn the next day, you have to have consumed human blood. And if you don't, you will die. So when people come to Chaos and they want to become a vampire, he will bite them with the venom, but then he will put them in a cage. And if they are strong enough, they can get themselves out of the cage and then escape and then try and find a human to drink blood from. Otherwise, they're just going to die because you're obviously not strong enough to handle being a vampire.
Makes sense.
So then we meet Chaos in this hallway. Kind of creepy. He has, like, this helm that covers everything up here down to his chin, so we can really only see his eyes. And Jax warns Evangeline, like, never look a vampire in the eyes because they can, like, compel you and make you, like, infatuated with them or whatever, which is super dangerous. Evangeline also remembers seeing Chaos as one of the soldier-looking guys from the palace. He kind of shows up periodically in the books, but we don't really know anything about him, and she obviously didn't know who he was. but he is like a spy, obviously, so he's just always around. And Chaos mentions that his potions master received a request for malefic oil, and it was sold also by a woman, and the oil was what was all over Apollo's body on the wedding night. If you remember, he had a shirt off and had oil all over him. So someone had bought this oil, it was a woman, and that is the one that he had used that night. Now things again are seeming to sound like Marisol was up to something bad because a woman is buying all of these ingredients. Weird coincidences. So they try to leave as soon as possible because it's just really creepy, and Jax is like, we're done here, we got our information, let's go. As they're leaving, Evangeline hears from up above her in one of the cages, Eva, is that you? And who is it? Who do you think it is? Tell me. I'll give you 1 second. Yeah? Okay. It's Luke. Remember Luke? Little Dean over here? Yeah. He's now a vampire. Because when he got mauled by a wolf, his face was all like gross and he thought he needed a healer, but the strongest healer he could find was a vampire. And that if he got bitten by a vampire, turned into one, then he could have like a beautiful face again. And this is now the part of the story where Evangeline, who we all know and love, okay, up until now, she's been super smart, kind of naive, super cute though, love her. She does something really dumb. And because she's so trusting and she just believes the best in everybody, she goes ahead and finds a sword, because of course there's a sword in this random tunnel, and she hands it to Luke thinking, all right, he can get himself out, I can save him, just in case he can't get out of this cage. I don't want him to die even though he's a vampire now. He's not gonna hurt me.
What could go wrong here?
Well, exactly what you think could go wrong went wrong, because Lukey over here grabs a sword, uses it to like unlock the bolt, get out, and what does he do? He lunges for Evangeline. So he lunges for her, trying to bite her, because again, he's a ravenous vampire right now and he's so hungry. But Jax, our good old friend Jaxie Poo, he saves the day, lunges in front of Evangeline, and as you can imagine, he gets bit. And in a crazy plot twist of events, it's not just a regular bite, it's not a bite to be fed on, it's a bite filled with vampire venom. Luke at this point has now left the building. He's on his own doing whatever vampires do now. And Evangeline and Jax are now, they leave the lair and they're just trying to get to safety. They have to find a safe place for Jax because he's really hungry and things can go wrong really quickly. So where this lair is located, it's amongst this giant graveyard, and they find a mausoleum. So they're like, all right, we're gonna lock you up in here and I'm just gonna talk to you through the gate for the whole night. I'm gonna distract you. You're gonna be over here. I'm gonna be over here.
And it'll be fine.
It's important to mention also that Jax is really trying hard right here not to kill Evangeline, because again, he needs her for the prophecy and all of this stuff. So even though he's like really hungry and he could probably very easily break through this gate in this mausoleum, he doesn't. He's just sitting on this little coffin and he's like, all right, let's talk, distract me. So Evangeline obviously is going to take this as a really great opportunity to learn a little bit more about our friend Jax over here. So she asks him about Donatella and what really happened. Jax obviously does not want to talk about Donatella. He's like, anything else but this, but Evangeline persists. So we learn a little bit about her in this scene. And he says, the first time I met her, she threatened to throw me from a sky carriage. And she replies, and you liked her for that? I just threatened to kill her, he said, as if they'd been flirting. This is a terrible love story, Jax. Who said it was a love story? His tone turned back to acid. Evangeline thought he might even stop talking. To her surprise, he continued, though. When we met again, I kissed her. And now we already know how Jax's kiss is deadly. So Evangeline asks Jax, did you kiss her because you thought she was your true love? And he replies, no, I needed something from her, and I told her that my kiss would kill her unless she got me what I wanted. He lies to Donatella. He says, my kiss is always deadly. I just slowed her heart so that it didn't kill her immediately, but it should have ended her life in a matter of days, whether or not she did what I wanted. Obviously, we're all wondering, she didn't die in this story because she's still alive. We saw her in the beginning of this book. Why didn't she die? Because Jax's heart started beating when he did that. This implies, obviously, that Donatella was Jax's one true love, as the story curse implies. So it says, Evangeline felt that terribly painful something churning inside her once again. Not that the idea of this girl being Jax's true love should have pained her. She didn't even like Jax. She shouldn't have been bothered that another girl had made Jax's heart beat. She should have been happy the princess hadn't died. Maybe Evangeline was just feeling sorry for Jax because she already knew that the story didn't end well. Now we're learning again about how the story ends, and Jax, obviously believing how the story curse is supposed to go, he also believes that Donatella is his one true love. So he lies to Donatella, makes her believe all of these things. Donatella ends up finding out about all of these lies. She repays Jax by stabbing him in the heart. I feel like Evangeline is just such a good person at this point. Like, she really does feel bad for Jax, even though he lied to Donatella and she knows this. She still feels bad about how it worked out between them and that he may have missed out on his opportunity for one true love. And so she says just as much, she feels bad for him. She says, maybe the stories have it wrong and there's another true love waiting for you.
In this part in the story, I just become a congealed mess on the floor, okay?
And he asks, are you saying this because you think you can be her? He eyes Evangeline through the bars, gaze bordering on indecent.
Do you want to kiss me, little fox?
And she says, no, obviously that's not what I'm saying. And he responds, you don't sound too sure about that. You might not like me, but I bet you'd like it if I kissed you. Again, he is infected with this venom, so he's trying to say anything remotely enticing to get her to come closer to him. So we don't really know if this is him actually feeling these feelings or if he's just saying it to get Evangeline close so that he can suck her blood. Jax also switched gears at this point and starts asking her about Luke and what got her to fall in love with him in the first place, because he doesn't really seem all that great of a guy, as we all know. And Evangeline tells him that, honestly, Luke was just there for me when my dad died. He would come into the curiosity shop that I worked at and was always really nice to me, and he said something to her one day that was really uneventful, not really exciting, but at that point, Evangeline was just like, I knew in that moment I loved him. Jax is like,
that's the most boring thing I ever heard.
And Evangeline is like, not every romance needs to have a great love story, and she says specifically, I would gladly take an uneventful happily ever after. And Jax is like, absolutely not. No, you wouldn't. You wouldn't have been happy with Luke, and definitely not forever. The two of you aren't well suited. He's not half as strong as you, and he didn't even hesitate before he tried to bite you, and he wouldn't have turned himself to stone to save you. Now, we also learn back when Evangeline was turned to stone and she sacrificed herself, there was actually an antidote that Luke could have used to save Evangeline. So when she drinks the goblet of poison to reverse the effects of Luke and Marisol and everybody there, and she turns herself into stone, next to the goblet was a piece of paper with an antidote. If Luke had taken the time to just look, he could have found it and have saved Evangeline, and none of this stuff would have happened. But obviously Luke didn't do that. He just ran away. They get into a fight right now. They go back and forth on why Jax is being so mean to her. Jax just does what he always does, which is push people away. That's why he couldn't get Donatella to fall in love with him, and this is why he's always alone. So Jax is again just trying to push her buttons and is like, you sound jealous. And Evangeline's like,
if you think I'm jealous that I didn't get a chance to stab you, you would be right.
He says, prove it. He throws her his dagger, opens the gate, and just marches right up to her. And so now we're in a very compromising position. We have now reached chapter 45, or which I like to call the most antagonizing, angsty, devastatingly slow burn portion of today's book. So I'm now going to read to you several pages in this chapter because I cannot in good conscience just leave you here without any context. So like I said, they're very close to each other. Jax is looking at her like he wants to eat her, but again,
which kind of eat are we talking about here?
His hands are super, super fiery warm when normally they're very icy cold. He's dragging his finger up and down her décolleté, up her neck, down her corset, and she's just stunned at this point. Evangeline says, you should go back to the other side of the gate. Her voice was hoarse. Jax says, "You're the one who said I needed a distraction. Isn't this better than talking?" Her breathing starts hitching. She's like, "I don't think this is a good idea." And he says, "That's what makes this interesting. You can always pick up the blade. You wouldn't like me as a vampire, little fox." And so she notices that his eyes are just nearly completely dilated to black. She knows she needs to push him away, but she's really torn right now. Again, it could be from the allure of like the vampire eyes and all of that. But also there is something between Jax and Evangeline we don't really know yet. It's kind of like this weird hate situation, but she can't help but notice that she's really like, she can't move. And she's convincing herself he wouldn't even be doing any of this if it weren't for the vampire venom. It didn't matter that he was being gentle, that his knuckles were barely brushing her skin as they skimmed their way down from her chest to the back of her neck, while his other hand traveled to her hip, slowly gliding over her skirts as he eased her closer. His teeth at this point are like really, really close to her neck, and she realizes like she needs to stop whatever he's doing. She needs to start just saying whatever she can say to get him to leave. And so she says, "You won't want this later." And he's like, "I'm not really thinking about later."
And then he licks her.
One languorous stroke up the column of her neck. She gasps, "You don't even like me." And he says, "I like you right now. I like you a lot." He gently sucked her skin. "In fact, I can't think of anything I like more." So at this point, she's about done. I mean, we're all about done at this point, right? And so she knows, like, he's about to bite me. So she realizes the one thing she can say is, "You need me to open the Valerie Arch." And when she says this, he completely stills, but he doesn't move. He doesn't lower his lips, nothing. They're kind of just stuck in this moment. And they don't really realize how much time has passed until eventually she realizes his hands are back to being cold. And he realizes it too. And now it's just like this weird, awkward situation where they don't really know how long they've been like this, but it probably was longer than necessary. Super awkward, but then he goes back to being his own normal, mean Jack self. And once they leave the mausoleum, they start noticing that like Jax is walking really slow, he's yawning, and we come to find out that one of the side effects of vampire venom, if you don't like succumb to the urges and get to bite someone, you get really, really tired and you're gonna fall asleep. And that's exactly what he does. He's just a heaping pile on the floor like the rest of us, except he's passed out. And she needs to find cover quickly because it's now daylight and they're out in the open and people are searching for them. So now, as one can imagine, it must be like to drag a dreadfully handsome man across a graveyard into a town to find some place safe to hide. Jax, in his like semi-comatose state, tells Evangeline that he was the one who called poison to save her when she was turned to stone, and she suggested to the Empress Scarlet to invite her to Nocta Neverending. He says all of these things, and then he passes out, and he doesn't wake up again. Eventually, she finds this apartment to hide in. She realizes fairly quickly that it is Jack's apartment. She is ready to like leave Jax there and go to the palace because she is highly convinced that our girl, Miss Crusty, Musty, and Dusty, is involved in the murder of Apollo and the poisoning of herself. Because the math is just mathing at this point. So she needs to go and clear her name. And so she's like, I need to go back to the palace and do that. And while she's like looking around Jax's apartment, trying to find something to use to, there's like potions and stuff there, she comes across like a table of scattered mail and news. And of course she's gonna rummage through it. And while she's there, she's looking around and she sees that there's a newspaper article out and it says that her sister, little Miss Marisol over here, is now engaged to none other than the new crown prince, Tiberius, which is obviously Apollo's brother. And I think we all can agree also at this point that Marisol, there's no way in heck and bob that she just got Tiberius, Prince Tiberius, who she probably just met, to fall in love with her in like a matter of 24 hours. That's not happening. Evangeline thinks this as well, and she's like, I know for a fact that he is under a love spell, so we need to figure this out. I need to find a way to save him, to like get the truth and clear my name. So she remembers that Jax has that same spell book that Marisol had the recipes of the ancient North, and so she finds it, and she finds the full list and ingredients of how to make the love spell and the antidote for it, which is through making a truth serum. So she spends the night recreating this truth serum with all of the stuff that she finds in Jax's apartment. She writes a cute little note for Jax, and she sets off to Wolf Hall, to the palace, to try and clear her name. Brief intermission to have some lunch. We're back. The hair is somehow even larger than it was before. She basically leaves Jax. She writes him a note and is like, hey, this is what I'm doing. I'm going to the palace. Wish me luck. So she just hopes for the best here, which honestly, not the best decision on her part, but whatever. And decides to go on her own and leave the truth serum for Tiberius to find, because she believes that there's no way on heaven and earth that this little girl is now engaged to his brother. It doesn't add up. Something's fishy. We already know she smells like fish. Freaking sardines over here. And so she's convinced that he is under a love spell, and we need to get the truth of that to the surface. She puts it in this drink. It's like this popular drink that they have in the Magnificent North, and she leaves it in Tiberius's room. When she leaves, Marisol finds her in the hallway and is like,
oh my gosh, Evangeline, I'm so happy you're safe.
So they go into Marisol's room, and they're talking, and Evangeline is like super quick to accuse Marisol of all of these things. Marisol is like, please, no, I didn't do that. I didn't, kill Apollo, I promise. But I did put the spell on Luke because I hated being so alone, and my mom said all these mean things about me, and so I put the spell on Luke to fall in love with me instead, because I saw how good he was to you, and I thought he could be a good man for me. So sorry sis, I stole him from you, kind of thing. Evangeline Fox, being the angel baby nice person that she is, not only does she forgive Marisol, she also admits to stopping their wedding by the Church of the Prince of Hearts in order to stop the wedding in the first place. And this is when all poopy breaks loose. Because who calls Evangeline selfish? Who blames her for being called a cursed bride? Who calls the guards and says Evangeline is in the room and she just confessed to killing Apollo? This girly. So good old Tiberius, he comes into the show again. He arrests Evangeline, takes her to his chambers because he's like, I'm going to interrogate her myself. Ties her up and is like, I know you didn't kill Apollo, but I have to kill you anyway because you know about the prophecy and the arch. You know who I am. It turns out Tiberius is part of the Protectorate, which we heard about when Apollo was telling Evangeline that one night about the Valerie Arch. And that there's a group of people called the Protectorates, and they're like the secret society, and they were basically established to prevent people from trying to open this Valerie Arch, and he is one of those people. And he knew from as soon as he met her with the rose gold hair, she was part of the prophecy, and he couldn't let it come to pass, so he has to kill her. Now, if you recall earlier, Evangeline left this potion, this truth serum, in this bottle that looks like a popular drink, in Tiberius's bedroom, and he sees it and he's like,
ooh, this smells kind of good. This looks kind of tasty.
So he drinks it, not knowing it's a truth serum, and immediately he starts confessing a whole bunch of stuff that she's asking, one of which being the full prophecy, which we finally get. This arch may only be unlocked with a key that has not yet been forged. Conceived in the north and born in the south, you will know this key because she will be crowned in rose gold. She will be both peasant and princess, a fugitive wrongly accused, and only her willing blood will open the arch. It was very short, and almost every piece of it fit Evangeline. She heard the line about her being crowned in rose gold and being both peasant and princess from the Fortuna matriarch. It hadn't been true at the time, but now it was, because she was also a fugitive wrongly accused of killing Apollo. So basically every part of the prophecy is coming to pass, and it's all going back to Evangeline. Tiberius knows this, which is why obviously he's like, I gotta kill you. She is like, wait, but I am not a willing participant. It says only willing blood may open the arch, and I don't want to open it, so you don't have to kill me. But he's like, it doesn't matter. Magic things always do that which they were created to do. So he is basically just going to kill her, and she's like, okay, but wait. You don't have to do it. Just let your guards do it. Wouldn't want to kill Apollo's wife. Like, what would Apollo think? Blah, blah, blah. So he feels a little guilty, and so he sends in his guards, and right when he sends in his guards, she's telling the guards, like, he knows I'm innocent, Why don't you tell him? And one of the side effects of this truth serum is he can't tell a lie. So he realizes what she's done. He is like caught in this lie that he can't tell the guards because he knows that she didn't kill Apollo and all of this stuff. And he gets tongue-tied, and eventually he says, she's telling the truth. Evangeline didn't kill my brother. I did. Things move pretty quickly after this. Tiberius is obviously arrested. Evangeline is released from her ties. Marisol barges in and is like, oh my gosh, my darling, what happened? But at this point in time, the effects of the truth serum worked and the love spell was broken. So he literally looks at Marisol and is like, if I ever see you again, I will kill you. Leave. Jax is still nowhere to be found. Apollo is still dead. Evangeline is now the princess again. And Tiberius is just taken away. We have now reached the conclusion of this book. We've got like one more chapter to go. How does it end? I'll tell you. Now that she's back in the palace, her main guard is Apollo's old like head guard. His name's Havelock, and we see him throughout the book periodically, but he's like the head guard of Apollo, so he doesn't say much, doesn't have many lines. But now he's like, hey, Miss, Your Majesty, whatever, you have someone in the receiving room waiting for you, let me take you to him. So she's like, okay. So she goes, she does her thing, and she follows him through the halls, and she gets a voice in her head again, and she knows it's Jax, and he's like, where are you? I'm trying to find you, stay where you are. But he sounds worried in her mind. So in her head, she's like, he's probably just worried about me for whatever, because I didn't wake him up before I did what I did, but he'll be fine. He's probably the one who's looking for me anyway in the receiving room. So she thinks she's going towards Jax. Eventually, she finds herself in this tunnel. Havelock and this other guard lady have taken her down this like creepy dark tunnel. She has no idea where she is, and she's starting to get like the hairs on her neck sticking up, right? Like red flags. But we find out that Havelock is actually not trying to do anything bad, because when she walks through this tunnel, she finds at the end, in a suspended state,
Apollo.
Alive. So he's alive, he's not dead. They have kept him in a suspended state before he was able to like fully die. And they think that Evangeline, our girl over here, is the key to waking him up. So it's definitely giving Snow White vibes, like, you know, kiss him, whatever. Now, I know this may be confusing, but we need to refer back to our family tree over here. So Tiberius, when he was admitting all of these things to Evangeline when she was tied up, had said that the poisonous tears in the goblet, they're only said to work for Evangeline. That he didn't mean for Apollo to die, because he didn't think that the tears were going to work on him as well. However, Evangeline knows he never drank from the wine goblet, so he couldn't have gotten poisoned from those poisonous tears. It was just Evangeline that got poisoned. Tiberius doesn't know that. Obviously, that's what he confessed, and he feels terrible. He was crying when he was getting arrested. It was like a whole thing. And we know also that because he had taken the truth serum, he couldn't lie. So we know for a fact he wasn't intentionally trying to kill Apollo, and also those poisonous tears could not have worked on Apollo because they only work on females. So who could have had something to gain here? Who could have had something to gain from the death of Apollo? If it wasn't Marisol, okay, so if it wasn't Marisol trying to kill Apollo, because why would she want to kill him? She admitted to not killing him. And then it wasn't Tiberius, because we found out that he couldn't, and he was on a truth serum, so he couldn't lie about that. We have to go back to who wanted the Valerie Arch opened. If we remember the prophecy said it had to go to someone who was a peasant to a princess and who was falsely accused of murder, someone who was wrongfully accused. Who benefits from this prophecy coming to pass? This little guy. Our dear old friend Jax, the Prince of Hearts, needs this Valerie Arch open more than anyone else that we have met in this book. He needs a willing participant, and the only way to get Evangeline to do what he wants is if she were to find out somehow that Apollo is actually alive. And so now he's collateral, because if Jax poisoned Apollo, he knows how to cure and wake him up. And how can he get her to do what he wants? Is by promising, hey, if you open this arch, If you do what I want, I will then revive Apollo and wake him up from his suspended state. So all of these pieces kind of come together in like the last page of this book. The last paragraph of this book reads, Jax no doubt knew that she'd want to save Apollo, but he was deeply mistaken if he thought she'd ever open the Valerie Arch for him. Evangeline would find a way to cure Apollo on her own. Then she'd make sure that Jax never hurt anyone else, ever again. Jax was not her friend, but he taught her that she could open any door she wanted, and Evangeline knew exactly which door she needed to open next. So then we have chapter 54, which is just a little paragraph, and it says, in another part of Wolf Hall, a door that had not been opened for centuries began to stir. Its hinges creaked, its wood groaned, and the wolf's head emblem carved upon its center curved its mouth into a smile. So, where did she go? We don't really know. What we do know is that Jax was involved in this entire debacle. We have gone back and forth. He actually got himself accidentally bitten by a vampire, all in the hopes of Evangeline finally being willing to fulfill this prophecy and open this Valerie Arch. And that's how Once Upon a Broken Heart, Book 1, ends. This has been a doozy. I hope you guys have appreciated this plot summary. My hair is thoroughly frizzy at this point. I'm exhausted from talking, but I think this gives a clear illustration of our little situation here. So, in book 2, we now have Evangeline, who is currently very, very, very angry at Jax. We have Apollo, our poor little golden retriever boy Apollo up here, who is now teetering on death somehow, and it's up to Evangeline to wake him up. So yeah, we don't know what door she's opening, what's happening with this last chapter, what does that mean? We don't really know yet, but it will pick right up in book 2. So yeah, I'll be working on a plot outline as well for the Ballad of Never After before October 24th, because that is when A Curse for True Love book 3 comes out. So stay tuned for that. But thank you guys so much for watching. You've stuck with me throughout this video. Bless. Go ahead and give this video a thumbs up. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. I would love to hear your thoughts on this book as a whole. And yeah, until next time, I'll catch you in my next video. Thanks, bye.